Hey, how are you?
Morning.
Hi, gentlemen. Y'all all right? Melanie, how are you, darling?
I'm good.
You were baseballing it all weekend, right?
I
Softball?
was,
Yeah.
yes.
You tell me
Early
before
in
they
the
get
morning.
started, I'm correct that you're not looking to go in special session, right? This is sort
No,
of
I don't know of
meet
any
and greet
reason.
type thing or something?
I don't know of any reason we need to, so I presume we're not.
Good up to you. Just if you did, I want to be sure I told you what
You
you
are.
need to say.
Y'all are now live.
And I left the call to order of the special session of the Glasgow Electric Plant Board, set up for the purpose of interviewing a prospective candidate for the superintendent's position. This is David Puscala. Did I get it right?
No, Puscala.
Puscala.
That's all
I'll
right.
eventually get it right. If you get mine right, I will try to get yours
I'm not going to
right.
attempt yours, sorry.
DT works. There is no agenda,
Well,
except for the fact that we are here for the purpose of interviewing David, and it is open, the floor is open to anyone who would like to discuss, and I will let David give a discussion of his experience and background and interest in coming to Glasgow.
Sure. Would you like me just to start then?
You're in.
All right.
You're up.
So my name is Dave Puscala. My background is electrical engineering from Michigan Tech. And most recently I worked for the Upper Peninsula Power Company in Marquette, Michigan. Personally, my youngest of 4 kids, my daughter recently graduated from high school in June, and long story short, my wife and I are looking at what's next for us, we've lived in Marquette for probably the better part of 30 years, and UPCO has been great to me, but I'm looking to do something different, getting into a leadership position. And we recently went on a hiking excursion over in the Smoky Mountains, and because we like this area, and started looking really in 2 areas. One is Wisconsin. I've been looking at in Wisconsin, and also in the Kentucky, Tennessee area primarily. I'm not really interested in Florida or Texas or anything like that. So as I was doing my research, this position at the Glasgow EPB kept coming up on my radar, and because of the size of the utility and the location, it just was an opportunity that piqued my interest. So I sent in my resume and cover letter, and here I am. But to give you a little bit more idea of my background, as I mentioned, I'm electrical engineer from Michigan Tech. I started my career in the electric utility business with Wisconsin Power and Light, and then after about 2.5 years, moved back to my home area of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and worked for UPCO. While I was with UPCO, I got into the business development area. It was a newly created position, and I was asked to take it on. And in that role, we formed a company called Superior Spectrum Communications, and it was a 3-company partnership between UPCO and 2 telephone companies, Hiawatha Telephone and Baraga Telephone Company. And so then I was the general manager, president of this newly formed company. And we grew it from basically nothing to about $4 million in sales over an 8-year period. And we sold it to another communications company. At that point, I had been working with a manufacturer in the area, Argonix, and was asked to take on their chief operating officer role. That company at the time, we had probably around 110 employees, I think, in 2 manufacturing plants, both, so that most of those employees were my responsibility. And it was a great run. We grew that from $9 million in sales to roughly $15 million. And then while I was there, I decided that I wanted to strike out on my own in business, and partnered with a friend of mine to form a company called Northern Energy Solutions, and also Iron Key Corporation, which I still own Iron Key. But we did Northern Energy Solutions for probably about, I think, let's see, it was eight years together, 6 or 8 years, and then I sold it to him and my partner, and at that point pursued returning to the utility industry. So I was fortunate enough to land a position back with UPCO, and currently work for UPCO as what we call an account executive. So my current responsibilities with UPCO are, I work with our largest industrial customers. There's a group of about 50 customers that I work with on a regular basis. 15 of those customers participate in our interruptible program, which the interruptible demand program, it basically gives them a significant break on their demand charges as a industrial customer in return for us being able to interrupt them if there's an emergency on the transmission grid. It's really in conjunction with MISO, which is the Midwest Independent System Operator for the Upper Midwest, and ATC, which is American Transmission Company, which is the transmission company in the Upper Midwest. So the way that the utility industry is structured in that area is there's really 3 components to it. It's the local distribution company, which UPCO is considered, and that's very similar to the Glasgow EPB. There's the transmission company, which is the link between the generators and the LDCs, the local distribution companies, and then there's the generators. And so UPCO owns 19% of its generation, its hydro generation. We actually own some combustible turbines that are only there in case of emergency, but our 19% of our power is hydro, and it's and then we buy the rest of our power off of the grid through open market contracts, and they're long-term contracts. They're not, and there's also some short-term stuff that we purchase as well. And so I'm responsible for managing our interruptible program, which is communicating with those customers, when making sure that they're capable of actually interrupting down to the level they say they can. So when they receive the call to interrupt, they've got to be down to the firm level that they've elected within an hour. And a lot of these customers, they love the price break, but they don't understand really what's at stake when they are called on to interrupt. But they're getting better. For years, we never had any interruptions, so it was just really a price break. Recently, we've had 2, and they're not UPCO interruptions. They're coming from the greater grid. When this issue took place in Texas, that's when we were getting close to having to call and interrupt power back in February. So the other piece to that is managing they're called economic interruptions. And it's the same idea that when an economic interruption is called, it means the power is getting expensive on the grid, and we pass through market pricing to those large industrial customers above the firm nomination during that time. If they don't want to be subject to market pricing, they again have to get down to their firm level. Now, that's not an emergency. They have the complete freedom to buy through, but they're going to pay whatever the market price is. So again, I'm just more or less telling you all of this to say that's one of the key programs that I manage with these industrial customers. I'm also involved with our distributed generation program, which is customer-owned solar. And any residential customer primarily, there's some commercial, but it's mainly residential customers that want to install solar behind the meter at their home. I'm their contact. As soon as the call center receives a call and someone has a solar question, it comes to me. They pass those calls through pretty quickly, sometimes unnecessarily, but so I manage that program really from start to finish, from the time that a customer contacts UPCO until it's inspected by the electrical inspector, and our own engineering team, has to inspect, and it's not complicated. And then I, make sure they're on the correct distributed generation rate and all that. So I've managed that program. as an account executive. And then the last piece is really to work with our municipalities and townships, communicating with them. And right now, we're in the process of renewing franchises. So Glasgow is all just the city of Glasgow, pretty much, the EPB. We're spread across 10 of the 15 counties in the Upper Peninsula and numerous townships, and so we have to have a franchise in each one of those. It's really just somewhat of a formality, but it still, has to be kept up. And they renew every 30 years. We just happen to be going through quite a cycle of renewals right now. So I deal with our local units of government quite a bit, communicating with them of why the ins and outs of this franchise, and then if they have any questions for me or for UPCO, I'm really their first point of contact. This morning, for example, I was talking to a township supervisor about hanging banners on our poles, and we have agreements with local townships to hang Christmas lighting, and in this case it was veteran banners. And so, between this morning I was on the phone with him. So that's pretty much a rundown on what I'm doing, today. I haven't really talked about my management experience, I guess, but that gives you an idea of what I'm doing today for UPCO. When I was with UPCO early on, one of my first temporary assignments was actually interim operating superintendent for one of our districts. The Iron River District has about 4,000 meters, and it's got a decent commercial base. I was interim operating superintendent for about a year and a half there. And then, the rest of my leadership experience has really been in the manufacturing area and competitive telecommunications. So that's the relatively short rundown of my background.
Any questions anybody want to ask? I'm the world's worst at interviewing people, so I never know what to ask until you've had a chance to drive around Glasgow. Does it live up to your expectations as far as a place you might be interested in living?
Well, honestly, I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew this really isn't, the Smoky Mountain range at this point over here.
No, we're flat.
And so, it's not that flat.
Not that flat.
Yeah.
We're hilly.
Yeah, but I was expecting flatter, I guess. And so driving some of the backcountry roads last night, it's a beautiful area, and more wooded than I would have expected. So I was impressed with that. I still don't know quite what to make of the lakes or the backwaters that are to the south. I was there yesterday as well.
There is a lot of lake down there,
Yeah.
but it's a seasonal lake.
Okay, and I haven't really figured that.
They drain it in the winter.
Oh, they do? Oh, interesting.
It goes down to a stream, I guess, a little more than a stream,
okay.
but it certainly, a lot of docks and boats are sitting on the flat when they take it out.
So I was.
has some good fishing.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was down there at the Narrows yesterday.
It's strictly a flood control dam.
Flow control, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was down at the Narrows yesterday, and I couldn't believe just the docks and the boats, and the activity. It was so I spent some time there and just enjoyed the atmosphere. So in my short time, I like the fact that it's located close to other larger metropolitan areas. Where we live now, you drive 3 hours and 15 minutes, and you're in Green Bay, which is great because I'm a Packer fan. But still, you're only in Green Bay, and another
It's a little
4 hours
chilly
later,
up there in the wintertime.
another 4 hours later to further south is Chicago. So that's our reality. Detroit is probably close to 8 hours away. Minneapolis is 6 or 7 hours away. So we're in a remote area of the country, which has served us really well. Marquette's been a great place to raise our family, but it's also very remote.
Yeah, snow doesn't disappear during the winter.
No, it doesn't.
So, my question, so If you're like me, when you're looking to possibly take a position somewhere, especially moving as far as this is, so what do you know about the Glasgow EPB? And what are your thoughts on its course over the last few years?
Yeah, I would say, so since I was basically talked with DT and asked to come down for an interview, I did a little research, and it looks like there's been some discussion with rates, and rate making is something that I consider to be an art as much as a science, but it's near and dear to my heart, especially with the customers that I work with. I'm also, I work with our smaller commercial customers on a limited basis. In our case, I would say it's those customers that are challenged by our rate structure that we have currently. And so what I looked for with rates in particular is fairness, and are they something that that all the customer classes can, at a minimum, live with, and more importantly, helps them, to hopefully thrive or at least meet their needs. And so, I think that some of the rate structure that had been in place was probably a really good idea, and but wasn't either sold well or fell short of meeting some of the customer classes' needs in particular.
Okay.
And I think that's what I gathered from what I read.
So to expand on that then, what are your thoughts on volumetric versus non-volumetric, especially as we look at smart home technology and the rapidly changing technology pretty much every minute, So where do you go on that as far as the future of sustainability for electric companies?
Yeah, I think that in general, this is an interesting discussion across the country, and particularly for the role I'm in now. When a customer is adding distributed generation, so home-based solar, what is the right price for them to pay for access to the network? And our base rate is $15 a month, and then it's volumetric on top of that. We have a lot of discussion going on as that's really not the right base rate. But what is the right rate, and who, you don't want, there's winners and losers in a lot of that. In our particular case, what I would say is that the seasonal customers, so we have a lot of seasonal customers, as you can imagine, where we are, whether it's people from Milwaukee or Chicago, or even people that own, we call them camps in the UP. A lot of people own camps, second homes. They're the so-called winners in the rate structure, because when they're not using anything, they're only paying $15 a month. It's really cheaper for them just to stay connected, pay the $15 a month. It's there if they go to their camp in the winter or whatever. It's always on, but really they might only use power for a month out of the year. The customers that get, I don't think it's hurt, but the larger user then is paying a higher volumetric rate, because it's all a balancing act. The money has to come from somewhere. Revenue requirement is the word we use in Michigan. I don't know what the word is here in
Zero sum?
Yeah, zero sum in Kentucky. But the revenue requirement has to be met through a combination of base rates or volumetric. But as much as the world is changing, the reality is nothing really changes that quickly in the utility world. And I think that the key to being successful for the Glasgow community is to really look for industry best practices when it comes to rate making. I don't think it's great to be on the bleeding edge of those changes. I like better to see what others are doing in whether it's a larger municipality or a different region of the country that sees things happening at a faster pace or ahead of time, and really learn from those experiences. And so, I think as time goes on, electric rates may look more like cable, where you pay a base, and for that you're getting access to the network, and whether it includes some kilowatt hours with it in a base charge, or whether it's a higher fixed charge and then a lower kilowatt hour charge. Again, it's an art, and I think understanding the customer base first, which I can't pretend to do here in Glasgow, but that would be my priority, is really understanding what our rates are now, how they affect the customer base today, and where can we make improvements.
So to simplify my question, your thoughts on volumetric versus non-volumetric? Because I do a lot of reading.
Yeah, it's always going to be a mix.
Especially with the energy industry, since I've been on this board. So to follow up, so I have another question though. So
Yeah, it's always going to be a mix, I think.
yeah. So I Googled you. So and
What's that?
I said I Googled you as well as the Upper Peninsula. Well, I mean, I like
Basic
to be
research.
prepared. I'm one of those. So in the Energy News Network, in April 7th, 2021, there is an article here stating that the Upper Peninsula Power Company has some of the highest rates in the country.
Yep.
So if you've looked at Glasgow, you know what's been going on here for the past 5 years.
Yep.
So that's something we definitely do not need here, because there's been enough divisiveness, really.
Yeah. Well, I'm not responsible for setting up those rates. So
No,
that's a different.
I guess my question, that goes into, it did have some of the highest rates in the entire country. So what motivates you to go from a for-profit to a non-profit business model?
Some of what you're talking about there, the UPCO shareholder is an individual shareholder, and it's corporate based. The reason I'm looking at municipalities is because of the fact that the focus should be on the customers, and being from the UP, I want to see UPCO continue to do better as well with our rates, and we can, and we actually have gotten. It's a long story that I really don't want to get into in this forum. We could talk offline if you wanted.
Okay.
I'd be very happy to have a long conversation with you that way, but in this forum I'd rather not. So, but the long and the short of why I'm interested in a job like the Glasgow EPB position is because I like to focus on the customer. My role is always, no matter where I've been in my career, it's been focusing on the customer. When you're in manufacturing and you're making a product that customers have a choice to purchase or not, they're not beholden to you. You have to focus on what their needs are and making sure customers are
True,
happy.
that is very true.
Yeah.
But this position is a little different, because you also have to look at the sustainability of the company.
Absolutely.
Because
So I think
this is the only power source that we
no,
have.
I think first, it's a balancing act. I think financial integrity is key, and that's probably as important or more important even than the rate structure for the customers. It really is. You have to maintain the financial integrity of the company. But to me, the best way to maintain the financial integrity of the company is to have a rate structure that works for the customers. That it has to work for all customer classes.
As well as the business entity.
Right. You need to be able to attract business. Businesses pay the freight for the most part. They're the largest users, and in any system, they're providing the majority of the margin a lot of times. Or at least the margin that helps sustain the company. And they have a choice of where to go oftentimes. But residential customers, are extremely important to any electric utility, obviously.
All of the customers.
All the customers are.
important.
So it's a balancing act.
Absolutely.
We have no control over the price that is charged by TVA.
Right. Oh, yeah.
We pay whatever it is. So
I really
we have to manage within that budget.
rate making is an art as much as a science, and I think in a job like this, it's really understanding what serves the community best, and working in that realm.
So does anybody else have any questions besides me? I mean, we came for an interview. Do y'all not have any questions?
I'm happy to talk.
We're,
Just
we're, we're listening. You're doing a good job.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be of service to y'all today. So what did you learn about municipal utilities and public power from your time on the Marquette board?
Yeah, so I was basically sitting in your chair. And what I learned is that it's interesting to operate a company in the public forum. But over time, it's something that you get used to. It's not really a big deal. I also learned that it's really important for the staff to keep the board informed with the information that they need to know to do their job. You know, the board, the way I view a board is it's really to set the long-term strategy for in this case, the EPB. And same thing in the case of the borderline power. And the staff, and particularly the superintendent, we call it the executive director, has to have a good relationship with the board, you know, to have a open share dialogue of information. Some of it's going to be informal. Most of it's going to be in this forum. And my primary takeaway, though, is that for the board to be effective, the staff has to do its job by making sure the board is informed with the information they need, you know, to not be caught off guard by something, or to find out through the grapevine that there's something interesting going on that really shouldn't be, you know, or that the board would frown on. You know,
Well, one thing I can tell you, you will be hard pressed to find a better staff than the Glasgow.
That's what I've heard. I've heard that from people out in the community.
They are phenomenal.
Yeah, good.
Absolutely phenomenal.
And when I say staff, I mean those that are sitting in this boardroom largely. You know, the superintendent and any other staff that's directly communicating with the board. That's where that communication really takes place. I mean, the board doesn't really communicate with other staff, and probably in most cases shouldn't to a large degree. You know, it's really, but so that's what I learned in my time. That was an elected position, and I actually did not run for re-election because I started to work for UPCO, which is a neighboring utility, and they overlapped. My job there at UPCO and my seat on the Board of Light and Power overlapped for about 3 months, and there was no real conflict during that time. But had I continued, there would have been a conflict of interest. You know?
Yeah.
But everyone agreed it was fine for me to serve on my term, and then I just didn't run for re-election. So.
And then I can't remember, let me pull your resume back up. On one of your positions, you had talked about key metrics that you put into place.
That was at the Board of Light and Power. I was involved in the key metrics, really, and that was a long-term to give the staff and the board both a tool to measure the performance of the Board of Light and Power. And it wasn't just me that did it, but I was a primary driver behind adopting these key metrics, so that everyone was really on the same page with. If everyone is more or less in agreement that the utility should be meeting these metrics, then you know, it's hard to dispute decisions that are made with regard to them. And they were based on, you know, cash position and cash flow targets, and those sorts of things. Because what happened with the Board of Light and Power is they ran into a cash crunch. It was well before my time, but because there was no rate increases for a long time, which was great. But then over a course of 8 years, the rates basically doubled. You know.
And then, of course, I know you said you ran for that board position. So with TVA and the EPB, there is a little TVA Act that is in place. And that is supposed to be to keep politics out of the boardroom of a municipal utility.
Sure.
So, you know, I would hope that we could make sure that we got back to that point. You know, so what are your thoughts on TVA?
Well, my understanding is that it's a 20-year agreement.
No, I mean on TVA
Oh,
in general.
TVA. That's the one area. So I mentioned how we're structured up in the upper Midwest. That's different, obviously, than the structure here. So I would have a lot more work to do to understand that relationship. But what I would do if I were asked to serve in this position would be to really look at the TVA for the person that's in my role now for UPCO. You know, who's my contact at the TVA to really help walk me through the ins and outs of the TVA Act, and who are the contacts that are responsible for helping the local distribution company like Glasgow, and leaning on them to make sure that we're getting what it is we should be.
Yeah. Well, our local representative, Arnie Peterson, he is always at anybody's
Okay.
disposal. I mean,
Sure.
he's phenomenal.
Then I don't see really too much of an issue if he's good and understands the relationship. And, but that'll be a learning curve. The TVA is just something that, of course, I've probably learned about it in high school. The TVA Act is part of a federal program and those sorts of things. But to say I know really anything about it other than what I read in the last couple of weeks, I don't have a lot of it.
Because I know TVA, I mean, across the country, TVA comes out on top year after year
Sure.
as far as partners for economic development for the communities that they serve.
Yeah, and that's that's important, and hopefully the city of Glasgow is right there getting what the TVA has to offer.
And they are phenomenal.
Yeah, so-
We've got new industry coming, and
Okay.
TVA has been very instrumental in that.
Sure.
Despite a lot of other things that came with that, but
Yeah.
from the city itself. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on that, because it's more than it's a whole community to look at.
Yeah.
It's a lot of different facets here.
Well, so I guess the abbreviated version of that then is, to me, they're the key partner of the EPB, and that relationship will have to be kept good and I would say utilized to the best of my ability and the best of the board's ability. So.
Okay. Y'all have any questions to ask?
You said you've been in charge of 110 employees, or had as many as 110?
Yeah, so as the chief operating officer, the manufacturing, I don't know the exact number. I would say it was around that.
Okay.
And, we were very manufacturing oriented, and then the engineering team, customer service was all just part of what I managed for the owner of the company.
Okay.
Yeah. What wasn't really in that role, what wasn't my responsibility was human resources and the finance. There was a chief financial officer there, and a manager of human resources that still reported to the president. So, yeah, the challenge there is, well, with manufacturing, it's finding good people that are willing to stay, because it was a hot environment, But we did a really good job with getting the wages and benefits to a point that worked well for the company and also worked well for the employee. Reduced turnover. That was one of the keys that I had to deal with, was just a lot of turnover
When
at first.
your compensation is too low, it's hard to keep employees.
It is, yeah.
They just take off like a rocket.
Yeah.
Got
So-
other opportunities.
Mhm. Yep.
And you currently own a business, is that
Yeah.
right, in addition to your job?
Yeah, so it really is more of an investment, I would say.
Okay.
And I have commercial buildings and storage units in Marquette. And then I also have, down in Wisconsin, I have a classic car restoration business. And I have a general manager there that's been with that company for 34 years. I bought it about 6 years ago. And I think actually it was his 35th anniversary in May, which he reminded me of, and I forgot. But
We
So
just
he-
had an antique car show here a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
Turned out,
Yes.
big turnout.
So he basically runs it for me. I take care of the financial side, you know, and I'm there, I try to get there once a month usually. But it really is more of an investment than it is active. I'm not active in the day-to-day anymore. I was for a while when I had Northern Energy Solutions as well, and that was a insulation company, a general contractor and installation company that I partnered with another guy, and then he eventually bought me out. So.
Anything else, anybody?
So are you a PE?
I have not.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So in the utility industry, the investor-owned utility industry, when I came out of college, which was a while ago now.
Me too.
Yeah. I hate to say it because I was always the young guy, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. Getting your PE wasn't really encouraged. It wasn't necessary. It's just not necessary when you're working for an investor-owned.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved into more financial, managerial type roles, and it just is something I never pursued. I passed the first portion of the PE exam, which is the engineering training, they called it then. I don't even think they call it that now. So I passed that piece, but then my career just, when it was time to, I think there was a period of then three or 5 years that I had to pass.
You have to work as an apprentice or under
Yeah.
some PE.
And by the time had passed where I would have taken the PE, I was really on to other things where it never made sense, so I never pursued it.
Okay, I get that. And then one other thing that I noticed in reviewing your resume too. So your tenure seems to overlap with more than one company at multiple times in your career. So if you were offered the position as superintendent of Glasgow EPB, would we have your assurance that you would be fully committed to that position?
Yeah, so the overlap that you're seeing was when I owned my own company,
Mm-hmm.
I was part of, so Northern Energy Solutions was largely operated by my partner. And I did the financial side, but I did consulting for other companies, you know, that they paid our company. So they were long-term consulting positions. It wasn't just, it was actually operating, you know, like there was a company called Race Ramps that I was the chief operating officer there for about 1.5 years through my company. So that was the overlap. Now, in this role, I would be dedicated to it and probably would start to look to, you know, divest of certainly the assets that I have in Marquette, the storage units and the commercial buildings. The classic car business, I'm not really sure what I would do with that, but it wouldn't be. You'd have my full attention.
Okay. Last question was 25 times 25.
Oh, jeez.
I just want to see how quick you are on your feet,
625.
so hey.
625.
Yeah.
As you think, I
What's
have
that?
one question.
Yeah.
I don't get a vote in this business, but.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sorry to have my back to you the whole time.
That's okay, because I'm just back listening, but
Yeah.
I noticed, this may be helpful to the board, when we were in some of our past troubles, you know, there was discussions where one of the gentlemen was trying to help them out that talked about how they have routine, regular workshop type stuff. So I don't know, he didn't really expound on that, but I just wondered if you had experience, you know, whether that workshops kind of help the board know what's coming down the pike, or whether it's to help with the community, you know, to
Yeah.
understand what's happening within the electric plant.
Yeah, that's something that the Marquette Borderline Power did use fairly extensively, were work sessions, but where you would really pick apart a particular topic. It would be much like this meeting. It was a single agenda. It was still a public meeting, and but it was considered a work session to talk about one thing in particular. And yeah, I think that those can be extremely helpful if done correctly, of course. You know, so I think between the superintendent and the board, the trust has to be built. You know, that as well. That'll be my first order of business, really, is building trust so that you know that you can come to me with questions and rely on fact I'm giving you a straightforward answer. I think that's important. But yeah, we use work. I guess we call them work sessions. And we had one. I remember when it was changing the distributed generation program from net metering to something other than net metering, which is what most utilities are going to. And that was just an example of when we did work session. So.
Okay. That was just something the other gentleman suggested to try to help a lot of times with the public too, just because you know people that have taken their position and that's the position they've taken and, we're not.
Yeah.
You want everybody to understand what truly is going on and how everything works. We've had experience with that.
Right. And when the way I guess the city of Marquette and the Board of Light and Power, which is the separate body that is the board for the Marquette Board of Light and Power, both though use I think the public has like 2 minutes. There's a public comment at the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting, and anyone that wants to speak can, but they're limited to 2 minutes. They can't. So that's the other way that we do it. I don't know how it's done here. That was in the days, so long ago when you could gather with everybody in a room. Right. Pre-pandemic. But
This is the only room, as far as I know, that we have to gather, so there's not a lot of room.
Well, we've got the background up there.
yeah. So.
Anything else? I guess we can stand adjourned.
So as chairman
Mr.
of the
Bellamy,
board, you had no
Josh may
questions?
show him around the plant and introduce him to people if you'd like, and I think we're done.
Yep, you have a motion to adjourn.
Have a motion?
Motion.
Have a motion?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. All right.